Hello all, welcome to this video of understanding the async and await keyword in C Sharp. In C Sharp, async and await keywords are used to write asynchronous code. Asynchronous programming allows us to perform time-consuming operations without blocking the main thread of your application. Okay. So async keyword is used to mark a method as asynchronous. This allows the method to be executed asynchronously without blocking the calling thread. When a method is marked as async, it returns a task or task of T object, which represents the asynchronous operation. Then await keyword. The await keyword is used to asynchronously wait for a task or task of T to complete. When an await keyword is encountered, the method is suspended until the awaited task complete. This allows the method to perform other operations while waiting for asynchronous operations to complete. Let's see an example. So in this example, the calculate sum async method is marked as async, which returns a task of int. This method uses await keyword to asynchronously wait for the task.run method to complete, which performs a time-consuming calculation on separate thread. When the calculation is completed, the result is returned to task of int object. So how to use async and await to write a asynchronous code? Using async and await in C# is relatively straightforward. Let's discuss step-by-step guide on how to use async and await to write a asynchronous code. First, mark the method as async. To use await within a method, the method itself needs to be marked as async. This is done by adding async keyword before the method's return type. Then the second point is use await to call asynchronous method. Within the async method, use await keyword to call any asynchronous method. The await keyword will pause the execution of the method until the asynchronous operation completes. The await keyword can only be used within the method that returns a task or task of T. Then the third point, return a task or task of T. Once the asynchronous operation is complete, the async method should return a task or task of T object, indicating that it has completed the operation asynchronously. So let's see one example. In this example, we are using HTTP client class to download the web page asynchronously. The getAsync method returns the task of HTTP response message, which are awaiting using the await keyword. Once we have the response, we are calling read as string async method, which also returns a task of string. We are again using await keyword for the response to be read as a string. Finally, the method returns downloaded web page as a string wrapped in task of string object. Now let's move to how to handle exceptions in async code. When working with asynchronous code, it's important to handle the exceptions correctly, as unhandled exceptions can cause your application to crash or behave unexpectedly. Let's discuss some tips on how to handle exceptions in async code. Use try-catch blocks. As as synchronous code, you can use try-catch block to catch the exceptions in async method. If exception is thrown within the try block, control is transferred to the catch block, where you can handle the exception as necessary. The second approach is use Task.Wait to handle the exceptions, but this is not recommended as it can cause deadlocks and other issues in your code. If you are not using async and await, you can use the wait method to wait for a task to complete synchronously. Note, we are waiting here synchronously. If the task throws an exception, it will be wrapped in an aggregate exception. You can use the inner exception property of the aggregate exception to access the original exception. Use global exception handler. If you want to handle exception globally, you can register a global exception handler using the app domain dot current domain dot unhandled exception event. So let's see one example. So this is the example of try catch. We are using try and catch. So if the exception occurred in between try block, we are handling or logging the exception in the catch block. In this example, we are using try block to catch the exception that might occur while downloading the web page. If the exception is caught, we are logging that exception. And here the ensure ensure success status code command the ensure success status code method on a response object is called, which ensures that the HTTP response is successful. If the response is not successful, an exception is thrown from here. Let's see the global exception handling example. Okay, global exception handler is the way to handle the exceptions that are not handled in your code. Let's discuss how you can set up a global exception handler in C#. So for step first, create an create a new class that implements exception handler. So like here, the first step is to create a class that implements iExceptionHandler. This interface is a single interface has a single method handle exception that takes the exception as its parameter. So we are creating one interface which has only one method handle exception, and there is a class called global exception handler which is inheriting from iExceptionHandler, that is this interface, and we are implementing the handle exception method. Then the next step is set the a global exception handler. So in this example, we are creating a new console application that demonstrate how to set up a global exception handler. We have created an interface called iExceptionHandler and the class called global exception handler. iExceptionHandler and global exception handler. In the main method, we are setting the global exception handler using app domain dot current domain dot unhandled exception. Where then we are asking user to press any key to throw the exception and waiting for user response. Once the user presses any key, we are throwing a new exception from here to demonstrate how the global exception handler works. Finally, the unhandled exception. Finally, in this method, that is on unhandle the exception, we are creating a new instance of global exception handler and calling its handle exception method. We are using wait method to wait for the task to complete synchronously, but in a real world we must use the async and await construct. When we run this application and press any key to throw the exception, the global exception handler will be called and exception will be logged to the console. So in this video, we have covered the basic of async and await keyword in C#. We have seen how they can be used to write asynchronous code that does not block the main thread. We have also seen how to handle the exception in async and async code using try catch block and using global exception handler. Thank you for watching this video and I will see you in the next video.